Well, we have two men to thank for the story and the site of Troy. Homer, who was an oral poet and to whom is attributed the first writing down of 300 or 400 years worth of the reciting of the oral poem of Troy, and more specifically the Iliad. And Heinrich Schliemann, who lived in the 19th century, made his fortune in the gold rush of California, true story, and with that money went to prove that the story that this guy told was the true story. And that animating question, is the story real, has underwritten over 100 years of excavation projects at the city that Schliemann discovered. And you see here the three other archaeologists who have led projects to this place. The original level that Schliemann identified, Troy 2, can't be the Troy of Priam and the story, no matter how closely we think the outlines resemble what we want the story to be telling us, because it's over 1,000 years too early in time. The level that you're looking at here, the street and gate and beginning of the wall of Troy's 6 and 7a, fit more closely in the time frame that the ancient Greeks themselves thought their history began. Troy 6 was a mighty walled fortress, and a mighty walled fortress was one of the features that we all thought we could say had to be true from the story that we had about Troy. This mighty walled fortress was partially destroyed by an earthquake. In around the year 1300 BCE, part of the walls of Troy fell from a severe earthquake. This is a region that's prone to earthquakes, and indeed, just about 10 years ago, there was another significant earthquake in this region, and there have been earthquakes over the years. Earthquake damage is pretty easy to identify in archaeological excavation. It's very specific. Walls and other buildings, other built structures sort of move over on their foundations. They fall in regular ways. The destruction is regularized across an area, and it's clear, therefore, that that is the sort of destruction that comes from natural rather than man-made occurrences. So the walls of Troy 6 fall from an earthquake, and when they are repaired in the succeeding level of Troy 7a in the next 100 years of the 12th century BCE, the 13th century BCE, from 1300 to 1200. You know how it works in BC? You know how we live in what century? What century? 21st. But the years begin with 20. You'd think they would begin with 21, but they don't. Do you ever think about that? That's weird. Except it's not weird. And the reason it works like that is because in the first century, the years don't begin with 1. Well, except for the teen years. So the year 1 is the first year of the first century CE, which means that the year 101 is the first year of the second century, and then, the trouble just goes on from there. And that's why we live in the 21st century, but the years begin with 20. It works the same way backwards. So the first century BC is years that are 2 digits. And then the second century BC are years that begin with 1. So, and then of course you have to count backwards. So the 13th century goes from 1300 to 1200. So 1299 is the first year of the 13th century. Anyway, in that century, the walls of Troy 6 are rebuilt. And when they're rebuilt, there are some bastions that might be for strengthening, but also are built in such a way that they provide additional defense in more what had been kind of open gateway areas, like this bastion that you're looking at here. And inside the walls of the city, occupation increases. The population density increases. And because of it, there is more storage that needs to take place inside in these gigantic pithoi, P-I-T-H-O-I, which are many large jars. If you only have one of these jars, you have a pithos, P-I-T-H-O-S. If you do not like this weird plural making that we do, megaron, megara, pithos, pithoi, I am sorry about that. These are Greek words. They don't make their plurals with S on the end. They make their plurals in these other ways. But luckily, in November, we'll get to the Romans, and they spoke Latin. And so some of the plurals work a little bit better from our point of view. So anyway, we have these great big jars, pithoi. You can get a sense of how big they are from this team of Troy conservators who put this one together. And you see that this fellow, who's about 6 feet tall, is just a little bit taller than this gigantic jar. So the jars are absolutely huge. They were sunk partially in the floors of the houses in which they were used. So you see one of those jars sunk about halfway down its height in the floor of one of these houses, which was built inside the walls of the city. In this aerial view, you get a sense of the size of the citadel of Troy, and you get a sense of something else, which is the large plain that surrounds it. When Blagin excavated, he looked for the cemetery of the city. He was very, very interested to look for the cemetery of the city, in part because of the spectacular discoveries that Schliemann had made 80 years earlier at Mycenae, which we're going to get to in about 10 minutes. So just hold on. But you will see in a few moments why Blagin was so interested in finding a cemetery here. Well, he did find a cemetery here, way at the far end, about 400 or so meters south of the citadel. And you see here the great plain stretching south from the citadel, the Dardanelles in the distance. This is a nice view. I took this picture. Troy. Everybody should go to Troy. It's an extremely cool place. Okay, so at the far edge of the lower city plateau, down there, Blagin found a cemetery of cremation burials in urns, large urns, such as this one that you see here. Inside the urns were the cremated remains of multiple people. Each of the urns contained multiple burials. All cremations, no grave gifts. He found 182 of these urns altogether. And since Blagin excavated, a few other smaller cemeteries have been found around the outskirts of the plain of Troy, all similar to this one. And the cemetery dates to the end of Troy 6. That's the only phase in which we have a cemetery. No other cemetery, so a cemetery from the period of Troy 7a has not been found, just a cemetery from the end of Troy 6. So here's the citadel, and it looks large and really, really impressive. And you can imagine these huge walls and this monumental gate area and all the megara, the large buildings. And no doubt in the middle of the city there were also megara, like they are encircling the inside perimeter of the wall. Of course, we don't have them because later construction and excavation destroyed the Troy 6 remains without recording them, so we don't actually have them, but it's not unreasonable to assume that they were there. And this seems like a very, very impressive place. And the truth is, as impressive as it was, under Manfred Korfmann's excavations in the 1990s, we discovered that it was even more impressive in the Troy 6 period, because this is the size of the citadel, and this is the size of the city, as was discovered by him from an extensive set of magnetometric investigations. Magnetometry does a kind of X-ray of the ground underneath your feet. And here's the citadel, and all of this red and blue are the remains that were discovered by magnetometry. That cemetery is down around here. Like I say, that's about 400 meters south of the citadel wall. You see in blue what looks like a very regular sort of plaid. And here's a photo. That was a plan, and here's a photograph of that magnetometry. And if you excavate underneath one of these fuzzy white lines, you get this. So it turns out that the magnetometric pattern actually shows us real remains. Now these remains, this nice sort of grid pattern remains, date from the Roman period. So forget it. That's very late. Way too late. Just practically modern. But in addition to the grid pattern, which turned out to be a grid pattern of Roman streets, Korfmann's magnetometers also saw this. And this wavy line, which doesn't look like it has anything to do with the grid, suggested to them that this reflected remains that were of a completely different period than the remains that showed up in the grid pattern. And sure enough, when they excavated right down here, they found at ground level a deep trench, something that looks kind of like a moat, and a skinny trench with little post holes on either side of it. And here you see what that skinny trench with post holes on either side of it looks like. This deep trench here is, I wrote this down somewhere, 12 feet wide and 6 feet deep. And there is an open area without the trench in between. And what these are the echoes of more substantial fortifications. So this is for a big wooden, like a palisade, and the post holes on either side would be the posts that would keep up the palisade. And the palisade lies just inside a huge moat, or it's usually called a ditch. And through the ditch, at just a couple of places, were gateways, were entranceways. And what that tells us is that the lower city, the entire plateau, was fortified in the Troy 6 period, because this ditch and palisade date from the Troy 6 period. And so, rather than conceiving of a city of this size, we can conceive of a city of this size. And indeed, further excavation at some of the areas in here recovered housing from the Troy 6 period. And that allows a reconstruction of the city of Troy, which is very different and even more grand than the conception that Schliemann or Dirkfelder-Blagen initially had, with a fortified, not city, but citadel, that is a part of the city, the part of the city that has its own special fortifications, with its own larger houses, and then all of the additional houses of all the rest of the folks, all of us low-lying folks, down and around it. And this is the city that is partially damaged by earthquake, and after the earthquake damage, the city is radically depopulated. All the habitation of the lower city disappears. It's not inhabited anymore after that. All the habitation now is in the citadel itself, and in the area of the citadel itself, it's much less grand because, as we have seen, the remains show us that instead of having separated large structures. We have lots of little structures built close together with great big storage vessels and so forth inside. So, that is what archaeology tells us in brief about Troy 6 and Troy 7a, which, if you have studied your handout, that scary-looking handout that I've given you, you know means late Bronze Age Troy. Troy of the second millennium BCE. And now my question to you, which you know you should already be prepared for this, talk to somebody who's sitting nearby you, and come up with a few things that you know about life in late Bronze Age Troy from the excavations. So, so remember the list of things that you made about what you think you know about the story of from that story about you might want to look back at that and say, well, are any of those things? That's okay? You have a whole list? Okay, you guys have stuff? All right, let's see. How about if I go diagonally right here? Because if I stand right here, I see a whole bunch of people right in a row. I like to do this because then we don't have to waste time with hands raising. So, tell me something you know.
Well, I believe that they're preparing for a big event such as a
You believe that in Troy 7a, they're preparing for a big event, or in Troy 6 and Troy 7a?
Probably both, because I think like with the earthquake that everybody just started coming over to the walls and they retreat and see it out, and then there's like massive housing and everybody's living in one place and there's so much storage.
So in Troy 7a, it looks like they're preparing for some kind of man-made, man-brought trouble. Human, this to be fair. Human-brought trouble. Okay, that's one possibility. You just might make a list. We'll not vote on every single thing. Not everybody might agree with that, but that's one possibility. Next, something else?
During Troy 6a, they were extremely wealthy to be able to support that many people to have such a large city.
A very wealthy city. They must have been very wealthy because they built these massive walls and they had a very massive city. So there is every indication that it was a wealthy place. Something else?
Troy 7a, like population increased by that time.
From the excavations, we know that in Troy 7a, population decreased. That's a very good and logical conclusion. In fact, that's a sort of conclusion that I call the one-step conclusion. This is one of my little rules about archaeology. Archaeology can be, you can shoot off, rocket launch yourself into the cosmos of speculation pretty quickly with archaeology. I like to go step by step. And I like to say to my students, you're really only allowed to take one giant step away from an actual fact. Because as soon as what you say is no longer a fact but a speculation, you have to stop. You can't use that speculation to then use it as a basis to speculate about something else. So one of the things that we know about Troy, from Troy 6 to 7a, is that the entirety of the lower city was abandoned. Now, this many people, the estimated capacity of the population of Troy 6 is about 7,000. There's no way that 7,000 people lived in the Citadel. So, a reasonable conclusion is that population decreased. What's your name? Krista. Krista's thought which is that the people of Troy 7a are preparing for war, for a problem that's being brought about by us humans, is a further hypothesis based on this fact that we can derive that population decreased. So now you're out in the the rings of Jupiter or Saturn or whichever was Saturn, and you can't make another step based on that, and you have to realize that itself is a hypothesis based on that data. Something else. Tell me something else.
It's very likely. I don't know a lot about Greek history, but why would you bury multiple people in one urn unless they're dying at a rate that you can't take the time to give them separate urns? Unless that's something very common, which is it's not relevant.
So an excellent observation and point is that there are multiple burials, cremation burials, in the urns. And one would like to know why that is. One would like to know what the reasons are. And one possibility is that there was a lot of death all at once, such that there had to be like a massive group, hurried burials. And that is one. So we have the fact of a lot of people being buried in the urns, and we have the idea that maybe the reason for that is that there was some kind of catastrophe. That's one possibility. It's not the only possibility. Hold on to that because when we get to Mycenae, we'll maybe come up with some other possibilities. But that is one thing that archaeologists said. This, of course, is one of the fundamentally fantastic things about archaeology. So often, you can't prove anything, which means that many more people can think they're right. You gotta love a field like that. It's not like math, just for example. Okay. Something else that we know about Troy. You right behind there in the red shirt.
Well, I was actually just wondering,
Do we know where all the people who lived down here went? We do not. We do not. No. We have no idea. Excellent question. Love to know. Hard to track. Hard to track people in this kind of era with this kind of evidence. Now, let me say, because I cannot resist, that we have a story that accounts for where a lot of these people go. Some of them go to Italy, some of them travel, some of them are taken captive by the Greeks at the end of the Trojan War. There's a great story to account for it. But to actually track these people specifically, we would need to find sort of markers, unassailable markers that reflected them. And we don't have that. The thing that archaeologists tend to use and use a lot, and you'll come across this in the readings that you have on Jerry Rudder's Aegean Bronze Age site, which are web pages, and which was the first of the site and subject links that I showed you on the class. The thing that archaeologists tend to use a lot is pottery, because there's a lot of it. It's a sort of everyday standard thing. You need to take some with you if you go, like stuff to cook your meals in and stuff to store your water in and cups to drink out of. And pottery tends to look different from place to place, and so archaeologists are very frequently lured into identifying from the style of a piece of pottery the people themselves. And for anybody who is drinking out of a, what do you call those things? You can see that I really live in the past. My kids complain about this all the time. I have not ready access to words for many things in modern life. Like an Nalgene bottle. Okay, good. Like a Nalgene bottle. So anybody who's holding a Nalgene bottle, if you think, you will one day no longer be with us, but your Nalgene bottle will be with us forever. Should that stand for you? If that stands for you, then you guys are all related. You're all the same culture group, the Nalgene bottle people. So that's the sort of issue with using pottery, and is one of the reasons that we cannot say, we'd like to say, but we cannot where all these people went. Tell me something about what you think of the city based on the fact that there's a lot of people living out here and some people living up here. Something about this society. It's a class system. It's a very, very clear class system. There are haves, there are have-nots. These are the elites, the wealthy, the powerful. These are the not powerful. These are the everybody else. And what do we know about these elites? We don't know much. But of the things that we might say from the city as we have it, what did they believe? What did they think? How did they represent themselves? Did they represent themselves? Tell me something. I'm pointing to you. Yep. It is real big for about 500 years, all through Troy 6. And in the century of Troy 7a, it's not real big.
So it's just the top part after?
It's just the top part for that 100 years. And this top part comes to a fiery end. That seems to be from human causes.
So that's just the citadel?
And that is the citadel. So that slide that I showed you that has the red outer ring and the yellow inner ring, that's this. Actually, it's this. This is the wall right there.
Question: if only the elites lived in the citadel and they lived there for 100 years after the lower population left, how would they do themselves?
Well, in the 100 years of Troy 7a, it probably wasn't only elites in the citadel. Lots of other people must have moved in. I mean, it got real crowded then. That's when we have those all those giant pithoi and all the spaces in between those large separated megara are filled in with walls of houses. So becomes, like Moscow during World War II, where all of the people came in from their winter Dachau's and lived inside the city while you were in peacemates. So it wasn't only elites at that time, or, probably couldn't have been. Yeah.
Well, I think we can assume that they had some kind of religious belief, something have like straight stones.
They do. So they had some belief in some system beyond, higher, outside themselves. And it was manifested in those standing stones, which I know that you all remember are called stelae, S-T-E-L-A-I. And if you have only one, you have stele, S-T-E-L-E. But we have more than one outside all of the gates of Troy, so we have stelae. Yes, so they had that as a set of, we'll call it religion. We don't have any other information about it. We don't know anything else about it.
Do we even know if this is Troy? Because the research seems to suggest that it did.
Do we even know it's Troy? Well, on the one hand, from antiquity until today, the site was known. In the classical period, this was called Ilion. That was its name. In the classical period, in the time of the Greeks and the Romans, who built that larger city all around and in here, they identified this as Troy. Now, you could say they came onto this about 500 years after the fact. In fact, they came onto it once the story of the Iliad was written down. But then you could say, well, but the people who lived here remembered and continued to use that name, so that when Greek people moved over here in the 8th century BCE, so 400 years later, after the destruction of Troy 7a, they were told this is the place. But whether you think that that is compelling enough or not is not the whole answer. Because really, the question is, could this place, no matter what it was called, say it was called Boston, could this place be the Troy of the Trojan War? Could Troy 6 be the Troy of the Trojan War? Could Troy 7a be the Troy of the Trojan War? One reason why and one reason why not for both. You can talk to your fellows and friends. One reason why not for both. Yes. Yes, there is a second base. And it's really important scrappy, and it's not actually a coherent settlement phase. It's sort of everything that's there until the next level of rebuilding. It's between the destruction and the next level of rebuilding, and that's for a couple of hundred years. And it's very, very easy. But it exists.
There was like a different author. I know this is a story.
Well, that's very fascinating. I don't know anything about it. If you find something about it, send me the link. What I would suspect you're referring to is somebody that's reread some ancient Near Eastern text that talks about some big battle where the Greeks lose, or somebody that would be identified with the ancient Greeks, and yes, and said, gee, this could be, the native telling of this story, as if it's some kind of, Pythagoras cast with point and counterpoint.
So Troy 6 wasn't written down.
Troy 6 is not written down.
But, so it wasn't, so then, I was just going to say that would be why. But if
Okay,
the other
just where am I? There. Okay, pick one. Troy 6 could be the Troy of the Trojan War, why or not? Troy 7a could be the Troy of the Trojan War, why or not? Troy 7a could be because Troy 7a could be the Troy of the Trojan War because of the additional steps that were taken to fortify the walls, which suggests some kind of fear of a human attack, such as the one that is told so eloquently through 24 books of the Iliad. Yes, so that is reason why. Something else. I mean, an answer to one of these questions. That's what I mean.
the Troy 6 could not be because
So Troy 6 doesn't match the story because the walls are destroyed not by human forces, but by natural forces. And that's not the story, because there's no glory and glamour in that sort of story. Then there was an earthquake. I mean, have you seen an epic saga about Hurricane Katrina? No. When it comes to natural forces, we have news reports, we do not have epic poems. So that doesn't seem to match. Next. The person who's next to the person with the white cap, so you're in luck. It's the person with the tangent. You in pink.
Well, Troy said would be because they had the trenches, those walls that had the two walls.
So Troy 6 was the kind of city that seems to match the story in the epic. It was enormous. It had a huge lower city with all those people. There was this great defensive system on the far outskirts. And you could just practically imagine the hero Achilles facing off with the Trojan hero Hector right outside that wide ditch of the fortified city. Could you not? Troy 7, so what you get stuck with is telling me why Troy 7a could not be the Troy of the Trojan War, right? Troy 7a, how might it not be the Troy of the Trojan War? Oh, and that.
It was kind of small compared to like Troy 6. And when they talk about
Yeah, it is not, it's true that it has large walls, but it is a sort of overcrowded, poorly, less well supplied, almost, some of the houses on the inside of the walls are almost hovels. You know, they're relatively small and there's nothing wealthy inside them. And none of this, remember the beautiful excerpt from Iliad 3 where the goddess Iris summons Helen and she comes and sits with Priam on the gates of the city, and it's and there are all the wealthy elders gathered around, and Troy 7a is is less of that kind of I wouldn't say hardly, but less of that kind of glamorous appearance. What is the one thing we should see evidence for without which there can be no epic battle? Weapons. Lots and lots of bodies. There aren't any bodies, although one might suppose that things got cleaned up. Who would be the bearer of the weapons? We need the other side. This might look like a place for such a story. It might not, but there might be just enough to lure you into saying, yes, this could be it. But for this to be Troy, you need the Greeks. Now, Heinrich Schliemann knew that. So after he worked at Troy for 3 years and to his satisfaction discovered what he thought was one side of the story, he took himself to Mycenae. Mycenae, rich in gold. That's what Homer says. Mycenae, rich in gold, the greatest of the Greek fortified cities with the greatest Greek king, Agamemnon, to look for the other side. He got to Mycenae in the fall of 1876, and unlike with Troy, he knew exactly where to go. No problem, because Mycenae, which you see here, an elevated citadel in the Peloponnese of Greece, was always visible. It never became buried. You are standing at the entranceway to the citadel with the enormous fortification wall jutting out and this huge gateway. And in 1876, when Heinrich Schliemann and Wilhelm Dürpfeld and the crew, dressed the way archaeologists dressed back then, I guess, went to Mycenae, this was the picture that they had taken of themselves. So it looked like it would be a pretty good bet that they would find the other side of the story. And in fact, when you walk through what's called the Lion Gate, based on the possible identification of these two headless felines, it would be good if we had their heads to know for sure if they were lions, but we don't, but we call it the Lion Gate anyway, because among other reasons that sounds extremely cool. And calling it the Headless Feline Gate would not work at all. So when you walk through the Lion Gate at Mycenae, right behind it, you see here the relief, there is an enormous stone-lined circle. And it was a circle that had within it graves. And because it's a circle, and because it had graves, and because it's the first of the circles with graves to have been found, it is called Grave Circle A. Archaeologists not so good at the imaginative names. And Grave Circle A was excavated, air quotes, excavated, by Heinrich Schliemann in much the same way that he excavated Troy. And he found 6 large graves that were deep, deep shafts, 10 feet deep. Here is just one of those, shaft grave 4. All of the shaft graves are called with Roman numerals. And at the bottom of, I will just go ahead quickly and then go back. At the bottom of that shaft grave, he found, laid over the face of the body of a man, not cremated remains, but an inhumation, that is a whole body laid out, this mask, which he identified as who? Agamemnon. Wouldn't you? No. Question. What is a shaft grave, and how do you get to the bottom of one? Well, a shaft grave is 2 to 3 meters, so almost 10-foot deep, large rectangle excavated out of the ground. Until about shoulder height or so, the walls have stones laid in to form a kind of artificial wall. That artificial wall supports a ceiling, a roof, of wood beams and thatch and mud. When you excavate this, before you put that roof on, but I think after you put the stones of the walls in place, you lay pebbles all over the floor, and the body is lowered in all the way down. And then the gifts, the goods, the grave goods, which we'll be looking at in just a moment, are lowered down. And then the roof is put on over the body to protect it. And then, when excavated, what the archaeologists find is in the dirt fill that's above the roof can be 50 or 60 or 70 broken clay drinking cups that are mixed in along with animal bones with that dirt fill. So what does that suggest? Some kind of celebration, some kind of funerary celebration or meal or rite that happens after the burial. Inside shaft grave 4 were 5 burials. 3 men and 2 women. Inside the shaft graves as a whole were 19 burials. 6 shaft graves, 19 burials. 9 men 8 women, 2 children, ungendered. And what that means is that every time there was a new burial, the whole thing had to be taken apart.
How many shack graves were there?
6.
So is this just something for like the wealthy shack graves, or is it for everybody?
So is this just something for the wealthy, or is this for everybody? You hold on to that thought for just a few minutes, and then you tell me if you still need to answer that question. So you get the point of the multiple burials and the undoing of it all. Not only is it an enormous community effort to execute one of these graves and the burial ritual that goes along with it, but it's even more of an effort the next time, because you have to excavate out the dirt filling, take apart the roof, move the body over so that the next body can be laid down with all of his or her gifts, and then recreate the rest of the filling. In just shaft grave 4, we're going to see some of the 400, actually over 400 objects, just from shaft grave 4. And while we're looking at these objects, here's what you're doing, in addition to being dazzled. Don't forget that, always important. But in addition, you are coming up with as many categories as possible into which you could slot these finds. So, for example, in shaft grave 4 was not only this gold funerary mask, but these as well. 3 gold funerary masks, each over the face, the head, of the 3 men who were buried in shaft grave 4. Quick, write down as many categories as you possibly can that you would put a gold funerary mask in. Quick, quick, quick. All right, give me a category. Can't hear you. So, a mark of royalty. Something that indicates royalty. You don't really mean royalty necessarily, but you do mean some extremely centrally important dude. Okay, but a king, why am I making this distinction? It's a wealthy identification, right. Why am I making this distinction? Because a king implies a specific political organization. A centrally important wealthy dude does not. So this definitely indicates somebody who has a lot of money, is a single individual, and wants that to represent him. But it does not necessarily mean a specific political setup. That's important. Okay, something else. Another category that you could put this in. Person next to the person that I just called on. Be great if I could learn all your names, but no. You. No, you. Where am I? I called in you, so you. Yes. Sorry about that. Another category? That's all you have. What about the material from which it is made? Gold. Mycenae rich in gold. Right, so gold. All the funerary masks are gold. You will see in a bit, in some perfect world even today, why that is a significant factor. Something else about this, another category that you could slot this into. Next person in that row. Wherever I am. excellent, very high level of craftsmanship. Next, something else. Could this be just anybody? Could this be just anybody? I don't hear you. Well, any one of these specific. Could this just be anybody? Why not? Why not? But, well, we know that it has to be somebody important, but yeah. So far, each of these are only males and specific males. These are tied to one individual person. That's how a funerary mask is made. Now, I'm not saying that this guy's head was actually shaped like, face was shaped like this. Certainly not. Hopefully. But these are individual features. If you look at this and you look at these, you will see differently shaped mouth and nose within parameters, but marks of specific individuals. So marks of specific individuals. 8 gold diadems were found in the shaft graves, and this is one of my favorite, 683 embossed and engraved gold foil discs, which must have been affixed to cloth, to like the shroud that wrapped the body that was buried. So more gold. Both of these would fall into the category of gold, luxury, wealth, and what might you say from this? What's a diadem? Oh, a diadem is the male version of a tiara. It's a fancy head deco thing. D-I-A-D-E-M. So it's something like a crown. And what does that then lead you to speculate? What does that lead you to speculate?
That they were welcome or important.
That this is a mark of some importance.
Yeah.
This is the sort of thing that specifically sets the individual who has it apart from somebody else in terms of position. All of these things show wealth. A diadem also shows status, a specific status. We don't know what that status is yet. We might not know what that status is, but it shows status. All the individuals in shaft grave 4 were adorned with these kinds of marks of status, and in other shaft graves as well, including for both of the children, not gold masks per se, but gold foil bodysuits. Two children gold foil bodysuits. Yes, gold. Yes, luxury. Yes, important. Yes, position. And what else? What might you say about a gold bodysuit for a child and a gold diadem? Yeah.
Almost as if they were important even as children. They were, like you would say, like an heir almost to some sort of lineage, that it's a great loss because they no longer can carry on the lineage, be they male or female, or most probably like male.
Probably, although we don't know. Yes, so that the status is not just to an individual. The status must accrue to family as well. Weaponry. Let's see. 27 swords. 60. This is just so amazing. This is like one of the most amazing discoveries ever made, including King Tut. So the numbers are just astonishing. 27 swords, 16 pommels. That's, that round thing at the top of the sword that you rest your hand on when you're not busy using your sword. of ivory, gold, alabaster, and wood. 38 arrowheads, an axe, a trident, 2 whetstones, 16 knives, and these daggers, inlaid with decoration. In addition to the category of weaponry, which all of those fall into, tell me something that these daggers have in common with the gold funerary masks. Quick! They're both status because they're very impressive. Something else.
They're all individual.
They're individual, and they are figural. They are figural representation. They are status, they are individual, and they are figural. They are figural adornment. They represent human beings. One of the things that you want to start thinking about, we'll pick this up on Thursday, is do these look like the same people as the people at Troy? All right. See you Thursday.